Welcome to the Money to the Masses podcast, putting you in control of your finances. It's a good thing podcasts are free, as this one isn't worth a penny. Here are your hosts, Damien Fay and Andy Leakes.
Now, Damien, before we get on with this week's podcast, you had something quickly to say about our sponsors.
Yeah, we've got a new sponsor, Money Farm, and Money Farm are an online investment advisor and one of the biggest digital wealth management companies in Europe. So a big thank you to them for sponsoring the podcast. Now, Money Farm create portfolios to maximise long-term returns using ETFs to make incredibly cheap portfolios. And you even get the first £10,000 of your portfolio invested without any charge from Money Farm. And if you enter the code MTTM20K into the box when you sign up, you get the first £20,000 of your portfolio invested and run by moneyfarm.com without any charge.
Great stuff. On with this week's show. Hello and welcome to episode 120 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay, and me, a slightly hoarse Andy Leakes. Damien, how you doing?
I'm good, Andy. Yeah, you are slightly hoarse today. What's happened?
I mean hoarse as in feeling a bit rough, not as in equine. I'm just had a bit of a cold, really.
Well, it's that time of year, isn't it, for colds and everything. We're doing the rounds in our house. But how have you been, apart from your cold, how have you been this week?
I've been all right. And I knew I'd get a cold anyway, Damien, because I booked the day off next week. I booked a couple of days off next week because it's half term. So I knew I'd get ill. That's the way it works. But yeah, I've been all right this week. Not really much to report. Just getting on with it, looking forward to the half-term break. You been up to much?
Well, I've gone podcast potty this week. I mean, obviously, my first love is you, Andy, in this podcast, but I've actually done some slight moonlighting in the podcast world. I'm still recording the interviews for the new series that's going to be out soon, but I got asked to do a podcast, to be on a podcast about happiness by Penguin in Publishing. People who listened to last week's podcast will remember that I did some bits and pieces for Penguin, the publishers, around money. I did some a talk and presentations around it, which was fab. And they wanted me to go on to... They're doing a new series of podcasts, which they wanted me to go on to do an angle on money. So I think the first one in the series was about... I think it's about health and nutrition and stuff like that. But this one was about happiness, and they had a couple of experts on there. One about well-being, one to do with nutrition, cooking, so food. But yeah, it was nutrition, and I was the money guy. So yeah, it was great. It was, go and listen to it actually. If you're listening to this podcast, go and search Penguin Living, or go on our Facebook page, because I've linked to it on there, because it's actually out today as we talk, Andy. So that's been quite good. That was something a bit different, going to a studio in the West End to record that podcast, and that's good fun. So I'm doing that podcast, and now obviously my first love, our podcast, Andy, to finish the week.
No, I did notice you've been out and about recording stuff, and good on you. It's it'll be interesting to hear your voice on another pod, and maybe I'll be listening to it thinking, God, he's not as good as Anchorman as me, or is it a she? Actually, how many were there in total? Was there someone who was driving the whole thing? Yeah,
there was an Anchorman. He's actually a writer on money, interestingly enough, but he also does voiceovers. He said at the time that he did the first ever voiceover for First Direct Banking when it first launched. So
okay, I remember when that came out, actually, the First Direct adverts.
Yeah, so he did that, and so he's got a bit like you, Andy, got a good radio voice. And then I said there was two others. So there's four of us in a room huddled together around microphones. But it is very funny doing it with a different set of people, because we obviously have our own way of doing it, Andy, and we're very good at it. And if at any point we need to stop because I have to run downstairs like I did last week, or go to the toilet, which was in, I think, the previous episode, we can. But obviously when you're with slightly different people, you probably have to keep a little bit of that under control, which
keep it tight, yeah.
keep it tight, and it's still good fun. So yeah, it's good to be back. But what's on this week's podcast is I've dragged a little bit of that happiness back with me, because obviously I was asked about happiness and money, and does money make you happy? And it's a brilliant topic, but I wanted to elaborate on it slightly, and so people can hear my view, because obviously you can hear it on that podcast, but so one or two other bits that I don't talk about. because obviously it wasn't my show. So I want to talk about that, and the other pieces. I want to have a quick chat about gold.
Okay.
Funnily enough, because I've received a question via Twitter.
Is it back in vogue again?
It is back in vogue in a way, because just so people know, I think it's rallied over 7% since the start of this year. We're only in the beginning of February, if you're listening to this in the future. So it's 2017, and in just over 6 weeks, it's rallied over 7.5% actually. So yeah, there's a lot of talk about it, and I got asked on Twitter by one of our listeners actually about whether to hold gold. So if you do want to ask me questions, Twitter's a really good one because you get a really concise answer, and I'm always on it, and you'll be able to get me. So it's Money to the Masses. The number 2 is the Twitter handle. And the last but no means least, a shorter piece, and I saw this in the press. I can't remember which newspaper it was in. I thought it was really interesting, and it's about how you stop your pipes freezing, and therefore when the heating comes back on, bursting and flooding your house, because it's cold at the moment. It's actually freezing at the moment, so it's very topical. But it's one of those things I've always wondered. It's one of those wisdoms that are passed down about leaving your heating on, and so this is a bit of truth to dispel some of the myths around leaving your heating on. So what do you want to go with first, Andy?
Should we go with the heating, leaving the heating on?
Now this was really interesting, because people always say that if you go away for any period of time, particularly an extended period of time, so there'll be people who are fortunate enough to flee this country in the winter and go to the likes of Australia or somewhere nice and sunny, and they may leave their house empty for a period of time. And of course, the thinking that if you don't, well, you want to turn your heating off because it wastes gas or electricity or whatever, and it's that money that you'd rather save. So you would normally just turn it all off. But of course, the idea is that if it gets very cold, then your pipes will freeze, and then the ice will expand inside, and then when it thaws, then your pipes will just basically leak, and your ceiling will fall down. And that has actually happened to somebody. I know. Well, I don't know. My brother-in-law's a plumber, and he told me about somebody where that happened, and it was a leak in the loft, and it actually it flooded everything, and it caused all the floors to fall through. The ceilings just to basically collapse all the way down the house because it had gone like that for weeks. Anyway, so what is the truth about leaving your boiler on? Now, I didn't know this, and I'm a complete fool when it comes to anything to do with plumbing. I tell you, I'll give you a tip. Well, not tip, an inside bit of background to how useless I am. We've got 2 showers in our house. We've got an ensuite where we did the loft, and people listening to this podcast will remember the fun and games of my loft conversion. And so we stopped using the shower downstairs in the main bathroom, and as a result, it basically seized up because it's hard water around here, and it's sort of, it starts getting all the limescale and everything, and it just seemed to stop working. And so I was trying to turn the thing on. So I went at it like a bull in a china shop and tried to forcibly turn it on one day. And cut long story short, I managed to send the water flying across the other side of the bathroom with mains pressure behind it, which thankfully there's my wife coming in the door saying, "Is everything okay?" And I'm standing there trying to play it cool while standing in a shower, having to strip off most of my clothes semi-naked just because I was soaked. My brother-in-law, who luckily is a plumber, drove all the way up for about 40 minutes to fix the thing for me, so it no longer works anyway. Hence why I didn't know that boilers these days do have a frost setting on them. Did you know that?
No. But
So there is a setting on some modern boilers that will mean they will kick in at a temperature to stop the pipes icing up. And I never knew that. So if you've got a fairly new boiler, have a look. And it's probably got this setting on it. Read the instructions. And so therefore it's meant to stave off the frozen pipe scenario. But also thermostatic valves on radiators are meant to allow your pipes and your radiators to heat up if the temperature drops to a certain level. So I have thermostatic valves actually on one of my radiators, but apparently you can have them where they've got a frost setting, and so it will allow the things to heat up, so they don't burst in the frost. So have a look at that. I mean, I didn't know anything about that. Did you, Andy?
no, I had no idea, Damien. So definitely food for thought. Good tips. What have we got next?
We actually aren't moving on yet, Andy. You're skipping ahead of yourself there. But I've got a couple of things, because there are people screaming at this pod thinking, I don't have a thermostatic valve or a frost setting, but apparently the ideal setting, if you don't have those, then bung your heating on about 7 degrees. because that is a level where, if you're going away, that is, and so you're leaving your house unattended, people think, well, do I need to leave the heating on constantly? Do I need to leave it on at a certain quite high temperature to stop it frosting up? The answer, apparently, according to the energy experts, is to set it on a timer and preferably put it on when it's the days are at their coldest, which means night time, and set the temperature to be about 7 degrees on your thermostat, because then your heating will come on as the temperature drops low enough for there to start to be frost and the potential for ice, which I think is quite a good tip, because there's no point in heating your house up for weeks at a time if no one's in it. And the other tip is to get a smart meter, which some of the energy firms do, whereby you can control your heating from abroad, which, if that tickles your fancy, then wonderful. And if anybody or the people who've listened to this podcast for some time may remember my frustrations when I actually house sat, and the person whose house it was had obviously smart app on their phone that controlled their heating, and they didn't have a thermostat on the wall, so I had no means of actually turning the heating up or down, and I couldn't find the controls that should have been hidden away, and I ended up having to text them in Thailand to ask them to put the heating on, which did feel like a huge step backwards in the grand scheme of things. But anyway, on to the next thing.
Good stuff. Oh, that is funny. Right. What have we got next? You can choose the next bit. How about that?
Yeah, what I'm going to do happiness. I think I need a bit of happiness. And the idea of happiness and money, which, I mean, I'll ask you, Andy, do you think money makes you happy? Or do you think I'll rephrase that. Do you think that you need money to be happy? Is it the secret of happiness?
No, I'm a big believer in I think too much money, and it lessens the enjoyment of life, because there's nothing to strive for, nothing to sort of aspire to. Everything is just handed on a plate. So I'm a big believer in, if you haven't got anything, then the stresses of not having money can make you very sad and depressed. But I'm not necessarily one of these people who buys into the fact that you've got to have lots of money to be happy. Sorry, that was a longer answer than you probably wanted, but no, I'm not a believer in money makes you happy.
No, I mean, I don't actually have the answer, so I don't have the secret to happiness. I'm not going to make everybody happy when they listen to this podcast, but it really is a conversational piece, actually, so it's a perfect answer you just gave. I just want to sort of throw some ideas out there for people who think that money is the root of all happiness. And I just want to give my 2 penneth worth, which is by no means gospel or anything like that. But obviously, what I used to do when I used to work in the city, I used to deal with a lot of rich lawyers who earned millions a year, and I used to marvel at how unhappy they seemed. They were happy in their jobs in terms of being important and their status, but they were working long hours. They were almost always heading towards divorces, or were not having very happy home lives. I sort of realised that they weren't happy, they weren't necessarily healthy, and I wouldn't have swapped my life for them, even though I had absolutely no money. And so I started pondering this, and when I was doing the podcast the other day for Penguin, we were mulling over the idea of whether money makes you happy. And I think it sort of comes down to, this is my view, and please write in with your own views, is that the level of happiness is not guaranteed by money, because as that example there I just gave, rich people are often unhappy. So just because you have lots of money doesn't mean you're actually going to be happy. And equally, there are people who have no money who are incredibly happy. And I think if money did really solve all your problems and made you happy, then there's obviously a limit. I mean, how much money would you really need? You'd keep going once you got there. And one of the things that almost highlighted the point to me when I was pondering this was that happiness is the combination of 2 things, and it's really pleasure and a sense of purpose. And that isn't my theory. I read that. I can't remember the book I read it in, actually. I would name check it, and it was just about general happiness. And I think it actually works very well when you look at money. So you can have all the money in the world, but of course you'll end up having a wonderful life, live on a private island like the likes of Richard Branson. But then I think there still becomes that sense of purpose. It's the journey of actually acquiring the money which drives them. And inevitably, it almost seems quite telling that many billionaires become philanthropists and start doing things that are for the greater good. For example, Bill Gates is trying to rid the world of malaria and various diseases, and equally Zuckerberg is doing something similar, and Richard Branson is pushing the boundaries of space travel. And I think that if happiness was purely about money, then people like that would actually stop striving to do something else. I think money isn't the root of happiness. If you have money, it can give you a sense of pleasure, but it won't give you ultimate happiness without a sense of purpose with that money. And it was taking that point on that you start to realise that money does. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that money doesn't make you happy. I wish I had more money, but somebody said to me, well, money gives you freedom, doesn't it? And I suppose, I mean, I totally agree. If money does give you freedom because it stops you having to worry about things, but I think it only gives you a sense to be able to have more choices, but it doesn't, again, make you fundamentally happy. Because I liken it to if you're trying to make a journey from somewhere, and if you imagine you were trying to go from one place to another, whatever that journey is in life, so physically I'm talking about, then that journey would be a hell of a lot easier if you had a car than if you were going on foot. But the fact that you were given a car, which is basically a metaphor for money in trying to achieve your dreams and happiness, is that you'd actually get there faster, but you still need to know where you are and where you're heading, and you still need a map. They're still the key things about whether you'd actually complete that journey and get there. The fact you've got a car might make it a bit easier, but I don't think it actually guarantees any success. And my view is, having met some amazing people who are incredibly rich, and having met some people who have very little money, and actually myself who doesn't have a lot of money, I actually think that money can facilitate things, can actually help you get somewhere, but what will give you a good sense of happiness and long term, I think money, it's not the money, I think it's actually going to be the something that's slightly inside of you, and your actual deriving self-worth from activities, experiences other than objects. Because if you derive your self-worth and happiness from handbags, how many handbags do you need? You'd always want another one. So that's my 2 pennies worth on money and happiness. And one of the things that actually is interesting about money is that money can actually make you very unhappy, like you said, Andy. And I think some of that, when you look at it, is down to the fact that money can drag you out of the here and now. And there's a very it's almost Buddhist way of thinking of things. If you're going to be feeling very happy, you have to be very grounded in the present, rather than worrying about things in the past or the future. And I think, unfortunately, money causes us to be dragged away from that. So we have regrets about money, things we wish we would do. We have worries about money in the future and what might happen. And so actually you spend lots of your time not enjoying life as it is and all that. So you end up being dragged off. And I think money is a problem in that respect. And so the best tips I've seen, and the things that probably do make people happy, and the reason they do, is when people have a plan of some kind. Like we talk on here about financial plans. And actually, it's not about the plan itself that makes people give that feeling of relief. So, for example, if you've got huge debts and you work out a way of repaying those, it may be you come up with a plan that you chip away at them very slowly. It might take you 10 years to get rid of them, but all you've got to do is stick to that plan. And we've talked about that in the past on this podcast. And I think the reason why people suddenly feel happier and more relieved and alive after putting a plan like that in place, the debt is still there. Fundamentally, their position financially hasn't changed, but it's the fact that they're not worrying about it. They're not sort of stuck in the future or the past. They actually can just park that issue and then just experience life as it is. So I suppose the whole message of the happiness and money is, just from my experience, I don't think money ever has brought people long-term happiness. It's given them certainly a good kick along the way, and it can, once you get to a certain level of fulfilling your needs, so be able to eat and all that sort of stuff, beyond that I don't think there's a linear progression between money and ultimate happiness. So that's my 2 pennies worth on it, and I'd love to hear people's views who listen to this podcast. If you think, Damien, you're talking complete nonsense, I am stinking rich and I'm loving life, then do write in and tell me what it is you do, because obviously I'd love to hear what anybody who's stinking rich and how they do it. But I actually think that most people will probably agree to a certain extent.
Okay, Damien, gold. It's had a bit of a resurgence. What's going on?
Right, I mean, I got asked this on Twitter, and this is the wonderful thing about this show. People get in touch, and we're now doing, people probably notice, we do a lot of pieces that are derived from questions we get by email or on Twitter or journalists. And I got one this week saying, is holding gold as a small percentage of your portfolio worth doing? So gold has had a bit of that you say, resurgence, and we're at the beginning of Feb, so in a little over a month, it's rallied by 7.5%, which is obviously a lot. And people are now looking at it again and going, oh, we should be all buying gold. And I just wanted to answer that question and just talk very briefly about gold and what investing in gold is all about, because gold doesn't do anything. It's pretty useless in terms of a metal. We don't use it in many things, as sort of some minor uses in, I think it's in engineering and whatever, but basically gold is something that looks nice. It doesn't earn any interest, it doesn't give you a yield, it just is a thing. So this quantity of a commodity, what you're hoping is when you buy it, that someone is going to pay you more for it in the future. That's really all it's going to do. So if you investing in a company shares, so you might buy shares in a company, and that company might make something new or grow its profits, and there are lots of things it will do to grow its value. So ultimately, the value of the share you have might go up. With gold, it's actually really based upon other factors that are out there that might influence it. And I want to give you just a summary of some of the things at the moment that have driven up the gold price. So Donald Trump is one of them, because the world is worried about what Donald Trump's going to do and what all the crazy things he says and tweets about. And gold is seen as a safety play. So if you imagine, if like in extreme, everything fell apart and currencies began to unravel and weren't worth anything as governments started collapsing, and not quite the point we all went to live in the woods, but ultimately the gold would be worth something, because gold is obviously we place a lot of value on it for whatever reason. So that's why people start buying gold, because they actually think it's got a better store of value than a currency, a paper currency that actually isn't based on any gold standard like it used to be. There's nothing that really backs it. I mean, other things that whenever there's risk and people are getting frightened, they go and buy gold. So at the moment, Europe is a bit something people are talking about again, with political risks and Brexit and other countries potentially looking like they could leave the European Union, or certainly elect governments that might not be so Europe friendly. And do you remember we talked about QE and money printing that the central banks do? That is one of the things that helps gold price, because again, if you print lots of money, then the money itself is worth less. So people think, well, why would I hold on to notes and coins when I could go and hold on to something of real value? People tend to buy assets, so that's another one. And inflation is another reason that people say that gold is an inflation hedge, and I'm going to come on to that because that was in the question. So that means that if you buy gold, it will keep its value over the long term, because inflation, if you hold something and inflation goes up, then in real terms, i.e. what you could buy with that, would actually fall, because the cost of anything you're trying to buy has gone up as well. So that's what inflation is. And so they're saying that gold is a good store of value. And the other one, which is the dollar. Slightly bizarrely, if the dollar goes up in value, the gold goes down in value. And that's just because, so that's simply because as the dollar rallies, gold is priced in dollars. And so as the dollar goes up, then the price of gold goes down. And what we've had this year is the dollar has fallen. So as the dollar has fallen, the price of gold has gone up. So anyway, bundling all that together, people tend to buy gold because they're scared of something. That is really what it is. And I think it was Warren Buffett who came out with a quote. And Warren Buffett, if you don't know, is one of the most successful and famous investors of all time. He's a billionaire, one of the richest men in the world. And he came out with a phrase, which to paraphrase, it's something along the lines of that you're buying gold because you're hoping that somebody in the future is going to be more fearful than you are right now and pay you more for it. And that's really why you'd buy it. And so it's quite a clever analogy, and it is true. So I want to go back to the idea, is it a good inflation hedge? And actually, it's not particularly wonderful at hedging against inflation. So if you bought gold today, Andy, would it be worth the same in real value as in a few years' time? So if you had a load of gold and you bought a car, would you be able to buy a car in 10, 15 years' time with that gold, or has it dropped in value? Actually, it has shown to be able to keep pace with inflation in some ways, but then if you look over the last few decades, so have quite a few assets, such as shares, particularly in America, and bizarrely another commodity, platinum. So the point of it, what I'm trying to say, the point of it is that there are lots of assets that keep pace with inflation, or seem to. So gold isn't particularly special in that regard. As for protection against dips, that couldn't be anything more untrue in a way, because gold is incredibly volatile. The price, I mean, the price to go up 7.5% in a month just shows you how volatile it is. It will suddenly go up and down. So if you hold gold in your portfolio, it doesn't reduce the volatility or the risk of your portfolio. If anything, it adds to it. And 80/20 investor members, that's my DIY investment service, go check it out and get a free 30-day trial if you haven't done so already. But I did a big piece on gold and how much you should hold. And I just want to give you one little sort of snippet tip on this, that if you hold more than 5% of your portfolio in gold, then actually the volatility of your portfolio starts to increase. The more you hold, it doesn't actually reduce it anyway, and it actually increases your chances of losing money. So gold isn't this wonderful object that you buy and it will protect you against everything. That's not actually true. So I mean, there are things that have been written about the perfect portfolio in the past, which I forget the guy now, a US author who wrote about a portfolio where you held basically, I think it was 25% in gold, I think it's treasuries, equities, basically 4 assets. And I'll tweet a link to the book after this podcast so people can go and find it. But he essentially bought one set load of assets in that proportion, and gold was one of them, and it was meant to always make money. I'm not a great believer in it. It has done fairly well, but actually if you move asset classes, like we teach people with 80-20, you're much more likely to outperform, because every dog has its day, including gold, because gold has previously plummeted and it might be on a little bit of a resurgence now. So the crux of all that is, if you want to buy gold, great, but buy it knowing that you're buying it because you're hoping that somebody's going to be more frightened than you are in the future and buy it off you at a higher price. It's not a safety bet, because it's actually incredibly volatile and the price jumps up and down. So you could buy it today and then suddenly find you could be a few percent down in a very short space of time. And if you do want to buy it, then probably the best way, if you don't buy physical lumps of the stuff, which isn't that easy to do, is to do it through something called exchange traded funds, which we won't dwell on, which are ETFs. That's the short name, which work like shares, but they're funds. They're incredibly cheap, and if you want to buy one, you can buy one that tracks the gold price. Then I would suggest you buy one that is called a physical ETF. Some of them have it in their name, so you'll be able to tell, but you can look at the fact sheets, which means it actually will, physical ETFs buy the asset that they track, because you can get ones that just synthetically mirror the price, but they use lots of financial instruments to do it, and something called counterparty risk starts to creep in, i.e. you've had to pay someone to promise to pay you an amount of money based on the movement in the price of gold or whatever asset. So somebody out there's betting either way on it, and you're betting the other side, if that makes sense. That's what those ETFs that aren't physical do, and so that person might not actually pay up. So that's why I always go for the physical, because it will actually move in line with the price of the asset that you're going to buy. So that's my quick piece on gold. And it was a great question. If you've got any more investing questions like that, then ping them to me. Like I say, on email, damien@moneytothemasses.com, or via Twitter.
Damien, I enjoyed it.
Well, I hope so. We covered a lot of stuff there. Happiness, gold, and heating. Probably the most eclectic mix of topics you're ever likely to get on a money podcast.
That's it. Have you ever been into gold yourself? And what I'm talking here is sort of jangle jewelry. I suppose I shouldn't say that actually anymore.
Probably not. But yes, I can't deny it. I mean, I don't like it myself now. But last week, listen to last week's podcast.
You had a phase.
I had a phase. I was born in the Chav Central. I was brought up in an area where people wore gold, and I look back on it now with not such fond memories in terms of like my dress sense. Now, it was the 90s, Andy. We were all there, weren't we? I was in my late teens, early 20s in the 90s. I'm not quite the man. I wasn't quite the man I am now. So yeah, I did wear gold.
Did you actually wear proper gold, or was it sort of gold-plated stuff and that kind of thing?
Probably the rashes would suggest it was probably fake gold, Andy. But I don't know. I didn't go and buy gold. I had no money, so no. I actually as a rule, I'm not really into jewellery. I just never have been. And interestingly, you say about gold and jewellery, that's probably one of the biggest uses of it. And you get the surge in the demand for gold, particularly from India, to bring it all the way back to investing again. And so you get periods where certain times of the year it spikes, which is quite interesting. Anyway, that's got nothing to do with what me wearing naff jewellery from, was it Samuel's? What was it? They're really, really naff
yeah,
jewellery shop.
Elizabeth Duke.
Yeah, and all of those. So yeah, they made me uncredited. They didn't make me happy, so I changed. I think that's it for this week, Andy.
Good. Excellent stuff. Yeah, we've done all the contact us stuff. Do review the podcast if you can. Getting some great reviews on there. And the podcast stats, the listener stats are going from strength to strength week by week. So thank you, the listeners, for supporting that. Right. Until next week, I suppose.
Until next week, and do write in with your happiness stories. And if you think I'm talking complete nonsense about money and happiness, then do tell me.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Plan. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.